right, guys, welcome to When Death Awaits Season 2.
Yeah!
We've got a sweet setup here at 7Eki Studios again. Thank you guys for having us.
That's awesome.
We're located out here in Burbank, and I'll put a little plug in for 7Ekis. They've got awesome podcasts, so definitely check them out. Bad Friends is an incredible one of our favorites. And, kudos to Diego for the sweet studio setup here.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a nice ode to some crime tape. We've got this awesome neon. Chris made these amazing t-shirts. We've got an awesome When Death Awaits mug. I think that's camera right there. We'll probably, if you're interested, let us know. Slide in the DMs. We can make some available to the fans, but a fun marketing piece for us. We took a little bit of time off, regurgitated, coming back roaring and ready to go. Thank you for all the fans who've come, and thank you to all the new fans who we've gotten as well.
Absolutely.
We promise to keep you entertained and informed, and we'll get right into episode 1 here, which it's called Every Picture Has a Story. And this is one where I think we find some of us, maybe living here in Hollywood, or even anywhere, you find yourself on a local news station. When you're on the couch, you're flipping through and you're like, wait, what? That's me. Or I know so-and-so. But Uncle Rich, something interesting happened to you. Can you tell us what it was?
Well, it was just one afternoon. I happened to be channel surfing, as I usually do. And while I was channel surfing, I saw this...
Such a boomer. No, I'm just
I saw this sort of a jailhouse riot. So, having been in some way familiar with riotous situations in the jail, having been involved in a number of death investigations in the county jail system, it gave me pause because I suddenly realized that was my case. I'm like, whoa, and they made it into a episode of, what was the...
It's called Most Daring.
Yeah, Most Daring. And I was like, what?
Yeah, it's a show from 2000, and it aired from 2007 to 2010 on Court TV. So you were in deep channel surfing. End up on Court TV and see your case.
Yeah, and what was interesting about this is the video showed a riot, and I'll go into the details of this particular riotous situation. But more than that, it just amazingly didn't include a whole lot of reasons why it happened. And that, to me, truly does reflect on how, in this particular case, whoever produced this definitely didn't want to go into that realm of the jail system that exists within the Los Angeles County, within Los Angeles County, because unfortunately, here in Los Angeles County, we have the, again, using the word, dubious distinction of having the one of the largest jail populations in the United States of America.
Now, it's also, we have some of the most number of people in America too, but with more people comes more crime.
Well, I would just say along that line, and is that we are running neck and neck with the New York City area as well.
Yeah.
So Rikers Island and LA County, right?
And I also don't want to discount the fact that the dynamics in each market and in each area that has, there are different influences, there are different population demographics, different probably dynamics with even the prison system and law enforcement that contribute to higher incarceration rates or, the other different activities that surround the prison system.
Agreed, but now we're delving into the sociological aspects.
I want to get canceled already.
That's true. I certainly don't want to do that. But I will just say this. While I was watching it, I come to the realization that there were so many details that were omitted on this particular segment of that show that I decided to pull the file and I wanted to share it with When Death Awaits, because I think it truly does reflect on what's going on today in LA County jails. First and foremost, because of and I won't go into specific politics associated with the situation, but literally the prison system here in California has now gone into the jail systems of each county, in particular Los Angeles County, which has the largest population of inmates that are disseminated throughout the state of California in our prison system. But I digress. I'm looking at this video and I'm seeing what basically happened. And what happened was I was dispatched with my partner up to South Facility, which is one of the 5 jail facilities within the compound up in the Castaic area. As a matter of fact,
Where's Castaic?
it's off the Highway 5, probably within about maybe a 2-mile distance from Magic Mountain.
Okay, so Valencia, a little north of Los Angeles.
Right,
A half hour, 45 minutes.
Right, exactly. So, and it was at one point a very desolate area, but unfortunately, there's been a lot of residents that have been developed in that area. But so I get up there and I learn as I'm driving up. This is the reason why I was involved in this riotous situation, is that there is a death of an inmate, and I was to investigate. And so I go up there and I learn that the inmate was at Henry Mayo Hospital. So I first drive up to Henry Mayo Hospital, and I note that the particular inmate has a scar, laceration on the top of his head. So at that point now, I then respond over to South Facility. And when I get there, basically what happens is that I find out that this particular inmate, and it's all caught all on video, by the way. The deputies were very proficient in terms of making sure that they covered themselves by way of video, because understand that anytime you investigate a jail death, in addition to homicide, you have internal affairs, you have the what they refer to as the state gets involved, the state attorney general's office gets involved, and for purposes of transparency, and then we have the oversight of the Max Huntsman unit that also oversees these things, so to make certain that that there is no nefarious activity on the part of these particular jail personnel. So with that said, I get up there and I learn that this particular inmate, Hispanic male, I'll leave his name out for the purposes of this case, was able to procure, by way of breaking off a piece of metal from the ceiling of this particular facility. And it was probably in excess of maybe 2 to 3 feet long. And unfortunately, he was on a methamphetamine bench. And now he's...
So how does he get meth? He's got meth and he's an inmate, so he's clearly procured it.
There's a number of ways you can procure methamphetamine. One of them, of course, is by way of your fellow inmate. What they'll do in many cases, they'll actually, what they refer to as keister it. They'll actually insert it into their bodily cavity, and then ultimately...
Their butt, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
All right. I love that, bodily cavity. I'm going to start using that for diaper change.
And with that said, they also have, we had an epidemic there for a bit. Matter of fact, just recently, we had a deputy sheriff from up on one of the facilities up there who was actually bringing in narcotics.
Oh, man. Okay, yeah. So he's gotten it from an inmate. He's gotten it through jail facility. Even with all the organizations you mentioned on the oversight of the jail system, there are leaks and cracks to exploit.
100%.
Okay, so this guy is high on meth.
He's high on meth, he's out of control, and he's swinging this very thin piece of metal around wildly, uncontrollably, and as he does so, he hits this elderly black man in the mouth. And I was told that that it actually may have broken a tooth or two. But at that point, what basically happens is that the African Americans that are in that particular dorm understand that this is a dorm experience. So it's not your typical cells with 4 or 5 guys in it. It is, in fact, a dorm. And the dorm itself is interesting because it is a sociological experiment. You have your African Americans in one corner, your Hispanics in another corner, your whites in another corner, and then your others, whatever they might be, in another segment. And it's to the extent that they even go so far as to tell you which toilets you can use and which toilets you can't use, whether or not you can use that phone, so forth and so on. It's well controlled within the inmate in those dorms.
Yeah, so the rules of the population. And I read that there were about 85 inmates per dormitory, and the South facility housed up to 1,700 inmates.
Right, and when we talk about 85, that's just what they want to have in there. Unfortunately,
we've had overcrowding.
Right, overcrowding seems to be a problem. So he hits this black man in the mouth, and at that point, a group of the African American inmates approach the shot caller, if you will, and his associates, his lieutenants, and says, "Hey, you need to put your guy in check here, because he's out of control, and we do not want a riot." So there was some level,
some diplomacy.
Exactly, and in defense of the African American inmates, they're literally outnumbered 2 to 1, if not 3 to 1, and that's the most interesting aspect. But they will hold their own. I've seen it firsthand. That being said, they end up. So the Hispanic inmates approach our out of control methamphetamine induced individual, and they try and get him under control. Because he's so methed out, they can't control him. And now the deputies see this somewhat struggle going on, and they march in. And as they march in, about 5, 6 deep, and they're now struggling with him. And that's when they accidentally hit him on the head. And his head is hit on the edge of these metal bunks. Now, granted, they all have, you're issued a mattress, but in this case, it didn't hit the mattress, it hit the metal edge of the what you call it? Of the
bunk bed?
Of the bunk bed, right. And so now, basically, deputies get over there, and he's spitting and he's bleeding. So they put, which is commonly used, they put a like a sort of a...
It's a bag, right?
Right. And it allows you to breathe and everything else, but they put the bag over his head, and then they put him on a gurney. So they're tying him up. And I remember back, and I don't want to go too far deep into this, but I used to work the hospital back in the day, and we'd had protocol for when individuals were in fact, drug-induced, whether it be PCP, cocaine, heroin. You never wanted to put them on their stomach because they could conceivably die by way of compressing their heart. So we'd always put them on the side, and basically that's what happened in this case. So now he's put into a room, and now we got to wait for paramedics so they could treat him. And as they're doing this is all in video, you see this nurse come up and tells the deputy, "Do you mind if I take his vitals?" And she goes, "No." He goes, "No, you can't, because he's too crazy, And so she walks away, and she had her little thing going on. And now we're into this for about 20, 25 minutes. And finally, the deputies are heard saying, "Hey, we have the paramedics here." So they escort the paramedics, come in, they escort them out, and there's the paramedic truck. And at that point, it's interesting because the watch commander, who was overseeing this particular incident, says, "I want 2 male deputies. I don't want," because there was a female deputy that was about to get in the ambulance. "I want 2. So this deputy...
Was it because he felt like she couldn't restrain her or
couldn't
restrain him?
Yeah.
And he wanted a couple, probably male. Okay.
Right. I think that was To me, the job is the job. You do what you do in terms of getting it done. And if you can't handle it, I would have said, hey, let me just go, kind of thing. But I digress. Deputy is chosen. And he thinks that he is the chosen one. And he sachets down the parking lot, gets into the locker room, takes about 15 minutes to ultimately come back, and he gets in the ambulance. It was like, really? So now they drive, and now they get to Henry Mayo Hospital, and as they're getting into the ER, the guy flatlines and dies.
Geez, so how long of a delay do you think that was altogether?
I would say about 45 minutes.
Man.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, when we look at this, whose fault is it? Is it him inducing the methamphetamine? Is it the hit to the head? And is it the delay in getting him treatment? And we can look at all of these factors when it comes to this. But what I found most intriguing was here he is at the ER, deceased, when suddenly a riot breaks out. How they got wind of this guy dying is beyond me.
So news broke back to the jail somehow.
Right.
And now there's a race riot.
And that's what you see here. And
We have a clip
I
of
think
it?
of a clip. Yeah, let's take a look at it.
All right, we'll put our headphones on so we can react to this live. And for those on the audio platforms, on Spotify, on Apple, we encourage you to go to the YouTube channel. We might even have this on our socials.
And the correctional facility explodes into a full-scale riot. The inmates square off using makeshift weapons.
you'll note that all of the, you can see way in the back, those that don't want to be involved, those are the others. But black and Hispanics, you can see it's definitely a distinction between the two.
Wow.
And you'll do anything and everything because you have minimal amount of weaponry at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, like, projectiles are kind of the first time, and like they're kind of, it's like old war where they're just like slowly getting closer to each other.
Right. Now,
And then what was that?
so this is, they deployed sting balls. Generally speaking, I do not encourage this type of weaponry in the jail. First and foremost, it generates a lot of smoke. And that smoke is not going anywhere. Suddenly, you don't even see anything.
Right.
Secondly, and more importantly, is the fact that these deputies have access to these weapons. But based on what I've seen, there's not a lot of training. And then lastly, and more importantly, I think is the fact that despite their deployment, the watch commander, who I knew, is screaming at the top of his lungs, which by the way is not captured here, telling them to stop shooting.
These was it spike balls?
Sting balls.
Right.
Sting balls.
Stingers.
Sting balls. So you can see these sting
there it
balls,
is.
Wow.
and all they do is sort of like a grenade, you just pull it and just throw it. And these things are
So it's
pretty
like riot
painful.
control type stuff. Okay.
Right. Generally, you don't. Who decided that we were going to employ these in the jail facilities is beyond me. I had never seen this, and I had been involved in a number of riotous situations to the extent that the watch commander, who was overseeing this incident, was in fact, there's my good friend Margarito Lopez there as he's walking, checking everything out. I had never seen the deployment of sting balls. But it's just fascinating to see that what ultimately happened. And there were a number of inmates. If you could continue going, just to show you the injuries that some of these inmates sustained during the course of you can see they,
Yeah, totally. Just
the fact is that they're hot. And they are stinging you, and now so in addition, conceivably somebody could have died in the process here, and then we would have had another issue. And what was particularly interesting for me was the fact that you have the watch commander who overseen this whole thing, and unfortunately I had to talk with him as well, because that was part of the investigation, and he looked at me and he said, "Do I need an attorney?" And I'm like, Do you?
No shit.
I'm thinking to myself, do you need an attorney? But what was most impactful as far as this case was concerned was the fact that in this particular video, which they obviously disseminated throughout the United States, was in fact they did not in any way include all of those facts that I've just incorporated in this thing. And I think that, to me, the spin that they put on these things is just for the purposes of entertainment and not necessarily for information.
Yeah.
Because understand that when this goes down, it's not just a situation wherein, okay, let's just go at each other. No. Both parties, they're shot callers. The guy that holds the keys, as they refer to him as, he's the one that authorizes the actual engagement. Okay, but more than that is the fact that every Hispanic that's in part of this, what they call the Southern structure, and that includes the blacks as well, they will have to engage in a fight in some way, somehow, or if they don't, they will see consequences on the part of their own group. So you could see from the video that they're fighting, people are throwing things and so forth and so on, but understand if they do not, they will in fact be subject to what they refer to as hard candy.
Wow.
And I think that's the issue. Hard candy, of course, meaning they could either get beat up or potentially even get so far as to get killed.
Yeah, are you with us or without us?
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think that to a large extent sums up this whole riotous situation in terms of what goes down. Keep in mind that the shot caller and both ends is definitely someone who they know each other. And now we look at this from the LA County perspective, but understand that from the prison system, it's just as common. This is a situation that manifests itself within the prison system, but it's now come full circle into our LA County jail system.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see them like put it in it. You'd expect this a little bit in a dorm style setting, right? I mean,
Right.
And it's less isolation. Then there's of course going to be more interaction, and that could lead to more violence.
Exactly.
I'm not a what is it? A prison system expert, or what's the best way to sort of get folks corrected, quote unquote. But I can imagine the risks involved.
Yeah.
What other mediation efforts could there have been outside of these stingers? Like, are there new technologies these days? Do people go in there? Do the guards rush in?
You know
Tear
what?
gas?
The issue of remedying these kind of, because they're basically, these dorms are already at a boiling point.
Yeah.
And I'll just give you an example before I answer the question, Chris, and that is that at night, about 9 o'clock at night, every night, you will hear, while you work in the jails, the Hispanic inmates will say, "Buenas noches," as loud as they can. And then the African Americans will say something in response. I'm not sure what it is, but they will in fact say something reflective of, "Hey, good night to all my fellow inmates." So that's sort of a reflection of the power struggle that goes on there. It's a truly a sociological experiment, because remember, these folks represent our communities,
Yep.
And that said, with regards to how we go about doing this, at one point, I remember in the 80s, we had the Crips were separated from the Bloods, and we had the Crips on the 4,000th floor of the new side of Men's County Jail. They took over the mess hall, and they were going to be pushed out. They were going to take over the entire floor. At the time, the watch commander who was there wanted to deploy shotguns.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he was going to deploy
cool.
shotguns.
Wow.
What's interesting about that was the fact that, that could have been. We had one guy that was able to push the door. He was on roids. I won't even tell you who his name is. But he was actually able to close the door of the 4,000 mess hall to the extent that they have now no longer used the mess halls. Yeah.
I mean, that's another element of this is with drugs trafficking in, and even if you have, big deadly weapons to hopefully deter, you're gonna get folks who are not have the mental capacity because they are high out of their minds, like the individual we had here, who are not even gonna appreciate the consequences.
Agreed.
Right now, why don't we hop into another kind of viral case that's going on right now? Do we want to talk about that?
It's Viral Crimes, where we take a few minutes at the end here to discuss what's happening the latest in the cultural zeitgeist of Homicide, and a familiar name and face on this one with a guy named Brian Koberger. Uncle Rich, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on what's happening here, and we'll have this YouTube video for those listening playing on this side. But this gentleman, Brian Koberger, is currently in custody and under trial for the murder of these 4 individuals in Idaho, in a town called Moscow. And what's interesting about this case is that he's a criminology student, PhD criminology student at the Washington State University in Pullman, which is a short drive to the city of Moscow, Idaho. Why he was there, we don't know, but he's been alleged and accused of murdering these 4 victims, I think via stabbing, if I'm correct.
Stabbing.
And this has gotten national attention. He has said he was just there driving around, and what's gotten the latest hype in the news is that he's called on 400 witnesses to come and testify on his behalf at trial. And everyone in the blogosphere and on the internet has been saying that he's just stalling to create an alibi for himself. And I think they're using like cell tower information. Right. Brian Koberger's his name again, and it's really hot. It's gotten a lot of news. It's hit the town hard because they're just like, why did he do this? Obviously, when we think about it, he's a criminology student. Is this guy just a psycho who's just obsessed with this sort of stuff? Probably like a lot of our listeners. No, we shouldn't crap on our listeners. But Uncle Rich, when you see this, what are your thoughts? How do you, from a homicide detective perspective, how would you go about this? And just generally as a bystander or as a consumer audience member, what are your thoughts?
Well, I look at this picture here in particular, and you can see that he's definitely scared because he's ever been introduced to the criminal justice system. Normally these guys are relatively relaxed. They know they're going back home. This gentleman here, he's evidently new to the game. But that aside, I noticed that the first picture they have of him, if you go way back to the start, he had like this green type of sort of strap on there. You know what that's for, right?
No.
That is so he will not commit suicide. So a lot of times if they'll tear their uniform apart and create a rope
or something.
A rope, exactly. And in this case, he's not going to be able to do that. That's the primary reason to prevent that from happening. So he's on suicide watch there. But going to the issue of him being, and I read up on some of the material. One of the things that I was really appreciative of was how Moscow PD was able to sort of present themselves as feeling overwhelmed. Like, oh my God, this is something we've never had before. When in reality they were preparing this case so they could ultimately capture him. And they were working directly with the FBI. They developed all this information, all this evidence that conceivably was going to ultimately bring us to our trial, which probably won't happen for another year or two, be candid with you. With regards to these 400 witnesses, needless to say, this judge is probably going to exclude probably about a good 90% of them because they have absolutely nothing to contribute to the success of his defense. And that in and of itself would just, I think what you said, Umar, all it is a delay tactic. The longer they wait, I had a case, took 8 years to finally get it into trial. And there's other cases wherein Sometimes it took me 14 years to get this one lady and her associates into court. So that in and of itself, we could talk about third-party culpability, blame somebody else. Let's move forward and try and see what we can do with regards to providing sort of a confused type of environment. Not to go back to something, but we could talk about the OJ case and how that was in fact the jury, I should say, was introduced to a lot of facts, and they were just going over their head.
Yeah.
So
it's an interesting tactic, but what has me is he was a criminology PhD student. It's almost like that show Making of a Murder. It's like he's learning on one side, on the academic side, probably hearing case studies of different things, and then it seems like he would want to just go out and try his own of sorts. Yeah, it's very creepy.
Yeah, it is, but you can look at the maybe it's the PhD thing. It's just pushing people over the envelope because look at that Aurora shooting when they were showing Batman, and that guy goes in and kills 72 people.
Right.
That was amazing. But going to this, I would say he was under the impression that he was going to be able to get away with it by way of all of his insight and knowledge. To the extent, if you remember correctly, they actually stopped him and his dad as they were driving back. They pulled him over. And they were completely oblivious to the fact that everything was being documented, recorded for the purposes of getting a conviction.
Interesting.
And the question was how did they identify him? Because he was arrested at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. I think is where he grew up. He's 28. And I think there was video surveillance footage of his car driving around that neighborhood at that time, and a few folks saying that, describing what he looked like or what he was wearing, and I think that's what tipped the police to identify him. And they were, and I guess they were all stabbed. It was fairly brutal. I think I read 26 stab or something like that. I mean, there were 4 that were killed. It's just a quadruple murder.
Yeah.
And there's also potentially forensic evidence, DNA evidence.
That's going to play large. That's going to play large in this, primarily because although, ID of a defendant is very crucial, but if you can establish by way of DNA or other scientific type evidence, that's going to push this thing over the threshold to a successful conviction, because ID, it could be easily dismissed by way of saying, are you sure? And suddenly the jury's looking at this and saying, well, maybe they're not sure. And you're going to get a successful defense attorney that's probably going to in some way undermine their testimony. And that's the beauty of a good defense attorney.
Well, thank you. That was an awesome recollection for a fun, most daring episode, and getting the behind the scenes.
I agree.
That didn't make it to the TV cut, but so we got podcasts. Thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, follow, include any comments for maybe questions even for Uncle Rich on the criminal justice system.